In the dusty outskirts of a small town in the American West, a notorious group of bikers known as the Black Vultures ruled the road. Their leader, a grizzled man named Jack Razor Donovan, was infamous for causing chaos wherever they roamed. The gang thrived on fear and power, intimidating civilians, extorting businesses, and making the local law enforcement too scared to act. One hot summer day, as they sped through the small town, Razor and his crew set their eyes on a seemingly quiet and insignificant spot, the military operations center tucked behind the local army base. It was nothing more than a series of communication and strategic planning trailers barely noticed by the average citizen. But Razor, never one to resist the temptation of easy targets, saw it differently. The gang could wreak havoc, steal equipment, and maybe even force the soldiers into backing down. It was supposed to be a typical biker day: ride in, make some noise, break a few things, and leave a few bodies bruised. But what they didn't realize was that they'd picked the wrong day, and they were about to cross paths with someone they never expected. Sergeant Eli Carter, a battle-hardened soldier who had served in several overseas operations, was stationed at the operations center. Eli was a quiet, reserved man in his mid-30s, with a reputation among his peers for being unshakable under pressure. He was far from the idealistic, naive soldier many imagined. He'd seen the darkest sides of war and human nature. In fact, he preferred the solitude of his military life, away from the chaos of civilian life. That day, he was tasked with monitoring communications, ensuring the safety of the base, and overseeing strategic movements in case of an emergency. As the roar of motorcycles echoed through the small town, Eli's training kicked in. He didn't hesitate. He knew how to handle threats. Razor and his crew stormed onto the base's perimeter, guns drawn, demanding control over the center's equipment. They were used to being in charge, but they quickly learned that Eli was a different kind of man. Before Razor could bark any orders, Eli took swift action. He locked down the entrance and activated a silent alarm. Inside the operations center, he didn't wait for reinforcements. There were too many of them to go head-to-head. But Eli had something that Razor didn't: an intimate knowledge of strategy and a calm, deadly precision. Razor and his gang burst through the door, thinking they had Eli at a disadvantage. But Eli had already turned the center into a maze of traps. He used the terrain, the equipment, and the confined space to his advantage. One by one, the bikers found themselves trapped, outsmarted by a man who had faced far worse than their crude intimidation. Razor, furious and bleeding from a few well-placed hits, realized too late that they'd underestimated the soldier. With a final push, Eli cornered Razor in the center of the room. Razor's gang, battered and scattered, had no more fight left. It was over. The bikers were arrested and carted away in handcuffs. But Eli wasn't finished. He knew how to break a man mentally, and Razor was no exception. Instead of turning Razor over to local law enforcement immediately, Eli took him aside and offered a silent ultimatum: stay out of town, or the next time they met, Razor wouldn't be walking away. The operations center wasn't just a military installation to Eli. It was a symbol of order, discipline, and the protection of the innocent. Razor had been an invader in that world, and he was reminded of it in the most brutal way. The bikers never returned to town again, and the legend of Sergeant Eli Carter grew, not for his fighting skill, but for the way he reminded everyone that sometimes the most dangerous warriors are those who remain calm under pressure. The small town lived on, unscathed and unchanged. But for the bikers who thought they could mess with anyone, they learned that crossing paths with the wrong soldier could lead to their reckoning.